In a world where many people see reality as a circle or a rectangle, the truth is that issues are cylinders. Rather than a two-dimensional understanding, we will flush out the three-dimension complexities through nuanced conversation and civil, respectable discourse to highlight all perspectives on controversial issues. I'm your host, William Roosh, a high school teacher who's trying to transform education as we know it. Welcome to the Anti-Echo Chamber. This is Cylinder Radio. Hello and welcome to the next episode of Cylinder Radio. I'm your host, Will Roosh, high school teacher, and I am in the middle of this series. This is the third one in the series on improving and rethinking education. My guest today is a friend of mine. He has worked in education for Stanford University. He's worked in tech. He worked for a nonprofit educational companies. He's been at Google, and now he is a PhD researcher and lecturer at the Faculty of Education at the University of Cambridge across the pond. Tyler, did I get that all right? His name's Tyler Shores. Tyler Shores. Did I get all that?
Yeah, sounds good. I think that's a good short version. Yeah.
Okay. Good to see you. I just want to say how we met is really cool, and I really appreciate you doing the podcast. And my second or third year teaching high school, I was at a charter school, and my principal said, "You can design a class, any class you want to teach." And I remember being like, well, I love The Simpsons. And I remember hearing about this crazy class where they actually taught The Simpsons at university. Maybe I could do that for high school. So I didn't know where to begin. And I think I reached out to you. You were the one who started The Simpsons class at Berkeley.
Yes, that's right. My memory started, that was a long time ago, Will. How did you find out about the class exactly? Was it Google?
This is like 2007, 2008. Maybe 2008, 2009, something like that. 2008, I think. And I think I probably just did an internet search and tried to find it and then found you. And you helped me kind of how to frame it. You invited us up to Berkeley with these kids who, rarely, if ever, left Los Angeles, came up there and they sat in on a lecture. And it was by that time, I think you had passed on the class to someone else and it was still, up and going. And we've kept in touch just through social media. Talking about tech today will be nice because you and I have kept in touch, at least to some degree now, for a long time. That's a long time, over a decade. And and it's so cool because just on the periphery to see all the stuff that you're up to, and I appreciate you being here because you're really an expert in this area. And thank you for coming on here.
Yeah, it's fun to take part in this, and also I'm very interested in I love talking about the topics that I research and work on. So the social media things, like social media education, technology and education. There's always new things to learn about all of these things, and kind of talking through it, having this sort of dialogue that we're doing here is a fun way to kind of test out ideas and see where we all have blind spots when it comes to our own biases and perspectives that we take about technology stuff. So there's a lot of value in kind of getting this out there, whether it's a community of teachers or researchers or different parts of the world. So I think it's cool. Awesome. I'm working on digital distraction right now. I thought I could start there a little bit and talk about my primary research is on reading and digital distractions. So that entails social media use, everything from how often we might check our phones and what are we doing while we're doing other things, multitasking, what does that do for how we feel, how we think, how we work, and all of that. And I guess I should preface, because I've learned my lesson from other interviews, is that talking about distractions doesn't mean that I'm anti-distraction. I'm not entirely anti-distraction. Sometimes we might truly need distractions because we've had a long day or we're stressed out, or sometimes things actually are boring and we want some other form of engagement. But I think it's not just an either or thing. And I think, and maybe some of your listeners might be wondering about these same things, but something is definitely different now than it was, say, several years ago, or certainly a decade ago, in terms of our everyday relationship with technology. And these are the sort of things that I'm really interested in thinking about, is that distractions aren't necessarily bad in and of themselves, but sometimes, I mean, especially now, because I'm starting to give more talks and lectures and interviews on this, is just sometimes our underlying motives for distractions can be problematic. We should talk about like the broader picture stuff about this. But for instance, like some of the questions that I pose to people when I do interviews and research and things are sort of like, do we run into distractions because we'd rather not face something else, for instance, whether that's work or unpleasant feelings or emotions or, whatever, like, are there things that we not confront and therefore go to social media distractions and like as a way of putting things off? And we all do this to an extent. But boredom is, I think, an interesting topic, even though like it's called boredom. But like, just think, for example, like, are we even able to be bored anymore? And what I mean by that is whether we're the kind of interstitial moments in our everyday life, waiting in line for coffee, or more often than not, the knee-jerk reaction is to pull out the phone and look something up, not because we want to necessarily, because we feel like there is something to look up, but it's just, well, I better check in while I have the spare 10 seconds or 30 seconds or something like that. The example that I like to use is that I worry about things like social media and the constant distractions becoming a sort of social crutch. A fun example of this, and again, I'm using like UK examples from here, but I think this would be a universal experience. If you've ever been to a restaurant or a pub or a bar or something like that, and there's two people there, and one of them gets up to do something, how long can you count before the person behind will whip out the phone or do something? It's usually 1 or 2 seconds. You rarely see someone not just be okay with that empty space. And I was like, I wonder about that. Is that okay? Is that weird? Is that different? The fact that we don't seem to be okay anymore with being bored and being just sort of disconnected for a little while.
Yeah. Oh man. I mean, there's so much there. I mean, even I was at this thing in New York. We were talking about civics education, and there were these children that designed a playground. And one of the things the children asked for at the playground is phone lockers for the parents. And it's because it's so, and that's something that I'm doing it. I do this social media thing now with teaching, and I'm on my phone sometimes, and my kid's like, Dada, look at me. And it's like, oh my God, yes. And I throw my phone, like, what am I doing? But I, as someone who loves getting information, I'm a very curious guy by nature, and just, you can scratch that curiosity itch. I'm curious about everything. So just I can get answer. But, it's getting in the way of things. And that's, for me, who's hyper aware of it, I can only imagine this is a pretty common thing.
Yeah. And that's there are reasons when you're engaging with your audience and these sort of things, you're looking for certain information. That's, that is a more directed approach to social media, which, but even then that gets addicting, and also kind of that it's self-reinforcing behavior. There's an interesting book. It's an academic book, but there's a lot of interesting stuff in that. It came out about 2 years ago. I think it's called The Distracted Mind, and it's written by a couple of psychologists. I think it was Rosen and Gazelli. They're from somewhere in California, I forget. But one of the things they talk about, which I think is kind of an interesting metaphor, is that in evolution, we grew up as hunter-gatherers and these sort of things. In evolutionary biology, the idea is that, all right, so nowadays we're mostly fine. Like the ones of us that are lucky enough to have all of our needs met in terms of food and shelter, all these things, but we still have that hunter-gatherer, constantly looking for resources approach. So we've taken that sort of constantly scanning for information. We become information scavengers in terms of we do this all the time with news or something like that. It's like, oh, I'm bored. I better check the news. I better check in on something for fear of missing out, FOMO, and these sort of things. We'll get into, kind of some of the psychological things that go with that.
That's fascinating. That makes so much sense too. Because we're still animals. We're still just a little bit more, evolved apes. And we have this technology. So we're still animals working with this technology. So it's just going to heighten. I mean, that's kind of what we've seen with social media and stuff like that. I mean, made us almost more primitive in some ways. like as far as like tribalism and things like that, which is weird. It just excels. It's like an enhancer for what is very, very innate in our biology.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up too, because I think to tie what I was mentioning earlier about some of these habits and these addiction forming behaviors that we have, like absolutely, there's no question about it. The big companies, we're talking about the Facebooks and the Googles and Amazons and whatnot, like they have an army of PhD researchers who know these things in and out, how the human mind, how human biology, neuroscience works. So everything is intentional in terms of like why are Facebook notifications this bright red color, because that's the shade that like most likely gets us to be like, ooh, like it's something, it triggers something in us that makes us want to tap the thing. Like everything is engineered this way. The sounds, the notifications that we get on our phones, the fact that we get these pop-up things, the things that like things move back and forth sometimes, it's all about tapping into like what will get us to use the product. And when I say product, I mean like social media, I mean platforms like Google or Amazon or whatever, as much as humanly possible. And they're very good at it.
Yeah. So, Tyler, I want to do another podcast with you on like that. We're kind of where we're going now. I'm going to kind of try and redirect the ship a little bit just because I'm in this series on education, but I want to bring you back to, because I think that social media, I just want to keep going down this road. Part of me does, just because there's like, is this good? Is this bad? Blah, 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 blah. But hopefully we can shelf that. And luckily I know you personally, so we can keep in contact and we can do it maybe down the road a little bit.
Minutes or so, don't end up being a train wreck. Let's do this again.
Yeah. No. This is, so getting into education and technology, I guess what I'm thinking is the technology as far as, very rarely, I don't know if I got to say this right. I think more people listen. I covered this with my podcast with Mike O'Keefe a couple of weeks ago, is more people listen than can read, or can listen than can read. So podcasts, audiobooks, things like that are for many people replacing reading. For myself, I have a long commute every day from north part of the valley all the way down to the middle of LA. So I read a lot, air quotes, audiobooks a lot, and I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I feel like I'm getting a lot of good information, but it's in a different way. What are your thoughts on, or what have you found in your research about like the method and these new technologies as far as helping with gaining of knowledge and like I'm reading nonfiction. I'm reading things that'll help me to understand the stuff that I teach better. Is it equivalent? Is it as good? Is it better? What have you found in that? What's your opinion on that?
Yeah. Tough questions, because this is all like, some of these are older questions, but some of them are, there's such a different context. And in terms of just like, all right, podcasts have taken off, audiobooks are like definitely on the rise. I was just reading recently the fact that really underscored it for me in terms of just like how much has changed recently. Earphones, just like the ones you're wearing right now. They are ubiquitous. They are such a common feature of everyday life. And I believe it was something like 400 million headphones are sold every year. So those are just new ones. Those are just the ones that, are being replaced, not the ones that are currently in circulation. I was like, all right, that's a lot. That is a tremendous number of things that people are plugging into like on a daily, hourly basis. And I was like, all right, so there's more new earphones being sold than there are people in the United States alive in the US. And I was like, all right, the US is a pretty big country. So that was just sort of like a thing that really like opened my eyes in terms of like, wow, so everybody is listening to audio right now. Yes, these questions are coming up in terms of audiobooks in particular interest me because I'm interested in reading from a research standpoint. And we still kind of struggle a little bit with like the terminology and all of that. Like, it's like, does it count? I gave a lecture at a literary festival and I asked the audience, does it count to say that you've read an audiobook if you, does it count as reading if you listen to an audiobook all the way through? And people were kind of split. They were sort of like, yes, but maybe it's not the same. It's like, do you say that it was read to you? Do you say that you've listened to an audiobook and all these things? So I lean a little bit more towards yes. The mileage is going to vary depending on the person, specifically learning styles. I don't know what, maybe you've covered this in the past or it's come up in your teaching, but some students and some people are just better audio learners and some are more visual learners. And Some of us are a little more bilingual in the sense that we can listen and read these sort of things. I've developed a weird personal habit that I kind of like to do both now, so that I'll listen to an audiobook, but if it's something really good, I'll kind of want a copy that I can be like, ooh, this was complicated, or this is really good. I want to commit this to memory, or work with this somehow. Then I need a paper copy. Like I can't just, for me, it sinks in better to actually read the words on the page of the screen. But I wonder right now, because of podcasts, because of all this audio content that's out there, and it doesn't look like it's going to slow down anytime soon, we could see more things like that. Educational implications are sort of there. I helped create a 60-second podcast when I did nonprofit education, which ended up being very popular, based on people's short attention spans and these sort of things. It was history and government and civics facts in 60-second doses, and ended up being an extremely popular podcast when it first came out. In terms of all right, people like bite-sized stuff. They like informational things. So it depends on your audience. And the cool thing is that this sort of content is getting people to listen to things that they might not ever have experienced. Been like, but the commute, especially if you're a Southern California driver or something, is like, all right, you can't listen to the same radio stations over and over again, or you can, but the same commercials over and over again. We kind of want a little extra stimulation. And then podcasts end up being this almost infinite source of knowledge and information and entertainment, all these things that we can get. So potentially there's a lot of
there might be some with your microphone is crackling a little bit. I don't know.
Still.
We try that. I think that's probably much better.
Okay.
Yeah, that's better. Technology is being brought into classrooms. I was at a very technological school. It was a Bill and Melinda Gates funded school. But the kids were just given brand new laptops and given all this stuff. And there wasn't any kind of responsibility, coupled with that. It was just, here's a laptop with internet. And it was just open, and it was a disaster. Basically, the school ended up basically getting shut down. So how to use tech, especially when we're talking about in education, was something that Mandy Manning talked about in my last podcast. Was a lot of times teachers they're given a smart board, or they're given a iPads or something, and then they just use it basically the same way that you use a blackboard. Mm-hmm. How to use tech is so important, and teaching that. Is there a way to kind of approach this? If there's a teacher listening to this, what way would you recommend that they approach how to bring tech into their classroom? Do you have any insight for them about maybe just a mentality to have or anything like that?
That's a good question. I would say I'm a big fan when it comes to if you're learning new things, whether it's learning ed tech or learning social media or whatever, is kind of look for your role models. In general, the Apple Distinguished Teachers, which is kind of a worldwide thing. It started in the US, of course, and now it's all over. But they tend to do a lot of things. If you find them on Instagram or Twitter or what have you, as a general rule of thumb, these Apple Distinguished Teachers are doing interesting things. So kind of just looking and seeing, right? That's a lot of how we learn, especially when we're new to an area of knowledge. We kind of want to see all right, what is this person doing, and what do I like about it, and what seems to be working?
Which is that's as old as teaching. I mean, stealing PowerPoints off the internet when the PowerPoints first came out, and then even going back before that, it was you remember a lesson that worked. I mean, teachers are thieves. We just steal what works. Why reinvent the wheel? Yeah. So why not apply that same mentality to this? So Apple Distinguished Teachers, I'm not aware of that, but I'm going to be looking it up today.
Yeah, it's such a big topic. If you just, were to type in education technology or technology in the classroom, you would get so much information. It would be you'd be inundated and not even sure where to look. It depends, because there are going to be self-motivated teachers like yourself and probably other teachers that who are going to kind of really suss things out, and you have to be a little bit of a scientist, right, to find out what works and what doesn't work, and why didn't this work. So it's a very analytically minded process to be all right, even starting with something simple. So let's say you're a brand new teacher and you've just been given iPads in the classroom or something, and no training or whatever, just here you go, Will, here's 30 kids and 30 tablets. you should be all set now. So go do your thing. Like there is good stuff out there. Google Classroom, for instance, like they do a lot of interesting things with education things. They do a good job with like using, for instance, Google Earth for geography lessons. Google Arts and Culture is wonderful. I just had a meeting with the Google team in London. They basically work with museums all over the world, say like the Louvre and the Smithsonian. So if you're a history teacher, civics teacher, or one of these things, you can actually show students like a virtual tour and be like, oh, like the Declaration of Independence, here's the actual, like, you know, a scan of the actual document, a high resolution thing, along with links to some of the other things. And it's good information that's content curated by like experts in these sort of things. So Google Classroom, Google Arts and Culture, these are nice things to do that they're good places to start. And sometimes they're good sources of information. Forums are a big one, but those are kind of hit or miss.
Right.
Everything's going to be like, those tend to be a little bit echo chambery too. I'm trying to think, like, it's a daunting task in terms of like, you kind of, and it doesn't quite work the same way where it's like, oh, teaching the piano or something. It's like, you know,
right, one
lesson ahead of the students. It doesn't quite work the same way for education and technology and these sort of things, because you need to have a working knowledge of these things. And I'm naturally like optimistic by heart, but I'm very like pessimistic in practice. So like, you got to think through what kind of things are going to go wrong. How are the students going to use things in ways that are unintended? So like, thinking through all these things can be like a bit of a rocky trial and error sort of thing.
Well, that gets me to another thing I wanted to talk about, which is, what would an updated 21st century classroom really look like? I mean, obviously we'd have to bring in tech, but you know, we can just do school better. But like all these things that you're mentioning about like just playing around with Google Classroom and Google Earth and designing these lesson plans, teachers, as much as we're notorious for stealing lessons, we are also, I'll get in trouble for this maybe, we are notorious for avoiding work if we don't have to do it.
Sure.
Like,
we're already pretty busy.
Yeah, so we're busy and, you know, we kind of get stuck in our ways. I think it's one of those jobs where for a lot of us, like if there's no need to evolve, then we won't evolve. And I'm trying to encourage us to, I'm saying us because like, you know, we educators, and you're an educator as well, like to evolve. Like we owe it to our classrooms, and like any job, if you want to get better, you want to be, you know, great at your job, you're going to have to update yourself. And I don't know what a 21st century classroom looks like. I remember reading something or hearing something about Bill Gates way back when he was starting Microsoft, saying like the idea of a paperless classroom. And there's a lot of paperless classrooms now, for good or bad. But what would, you know, a classroom, or what could a classroom look like in 20, 30 years from now for, you know, like this next, you know, generation being born? Because as much as like Khan Academy is great for math and stuff, mm-hmm. one of the things that I think it's really lacking is the personal connection. And personal connection is fundamental to teaching. The biggest, you know, breakthroughs I've had with students is because I made a connection with them. They knew I cared. They didn't want to let me down. I was invested in their lives. How that, you know, works with tech, I don't know if we figured that out yet, but what do you see as like a potential, let's not go dystopian, let's go positive, of a updated classroom using tech and trying to check all the boxes of what we know already makes a good classroom?
Yeah. Big question though. Yeah. And I 100% agree with the idea that, like, you know, the personal element, that kind of interpersonal thing, of course it's important. Like, you know, students, a good teacher who cares about his or her students, like, you know, can make all the difference. I'm just thinking aloud here because I don't have a great answer for this, but like, you know, it can't, you know, all this teach for the test stuff and all of this, like things that happen in isolation. What I'd like to see in the coming decades is just like, you know, education stuff needs to be more relevant to everyday life, which a lot of like teachers are very good at. Like, you know, especially in private schools, you get a little more freedom to do this than say public schools, but being able to be like, all right, so all right, think broad picture now. Like, what is the point of education in general? Like, what do you want students to actually be? You don't want them to just pass some damn test and like, get a certain thing. It's like, all right, to me, that's the bare minimum, and to get the diploma and these sort of things. But you want them to be, thoughtful, critically minded, citizens that can actually contribute good to the world. And I don't mean these things as like empty buzzwords. I mean, like, are they going to be able to, read the news to tell the difference between, like, all right, this elected official is sincerely looking out for my interests, and this other person is just talking bullshit. This is the kind of thing like, all right, how to be good citizens means like, how can you think clearly? Can you think for yourself? Not just memorizing facts, but education to me should be like tied into like the things that people really should care about. That's one part of it. For the education part of it, there's still a lot of potential with like, laptops and tablets. I've seen schools that do a very good job when it comes to like integrating these sort of things that I was mentioning, and like things can be done online. Textbook stuff has gotten very interesting nowadays. It's a whole separate topic, but like textbook analytics and learning analytics in general is a way that, say, I think Pearson is one of the big ones now when it comes to like you assign a textbook for a class, you're able to see how long students are looking, like spending on a chapter, how many times they actually looked at it. Did they do the assignment? You can actually see it's like, oh, okay, so they only spent 2 minutes on this, but this other chapter they spent an hour on. That's a good sign. What are they struggling with?
Yeah, I just want to cut you off real quick for the teachers out there. Data is good. So if you get it and you see that they're just not reading, like you might be like, oh man, that stinks. They need to, get whipped into shape. Like maybe, or like you said, maybe they're not connecting this to helping their lives at all. Like it's not practical to them. And to find that out, instead of the kid walks in, hey, did you do your homework? Yes, I did, Mrs. Yes, I did, Mr. Like, now the information is just good, and we have access to information. This is good because it helps us to become better. Just want to say that because that's really cool how you can see like how long they're actually spending time on it, and then use that to adjust.
That's a positive thing. When we're talking about, when you mentioned like, teachers have to evolve and like be able to use the tools, that's, I think, a good example. Like, like teaching is very hard and it's very complicated, but it's not just a blind leap of faith. It was like, all right, we're able, if we're smart about things, we can actually see what actually works and what doesn't work. And, like using technology as an aid, not a crutch, not as a replacement for like good teaching, but it can help us be better teachers and better educators. That I sincerely believe in. Otherwise I wouldn't be here right now doing the kind of work that I'm doing.
Yeah.
I think in terms of like, education technology and these sort of things, like being able to bridge gaps and barriers. I love seeing things where there have been partner classrooms where, like a classroom in California will be virtually work alongside a classroom, whether it's in Washington, D.C. or even in London, which is so neat.
That is awesome.
The world, a bigger place in terms of like, wow, like, these are kids who, if they're anything like when I was growing up, and it's like, well, I never left this state. I was from Hawaii originally in California. I'd never left those states up until I was, kind of like near adulthood and all of that. And I was like, there's such a big world and so many people that are different for you. Talk to people that are different than you. Like that is such an important life skill thing that the internet and ed tech can help facilitate. So those are the kind of things that get me helpful and hopeful about like, what might be ahead in the near future.
Absolutely. I love that. And that's, part of why I started my social media and stuff was to get just access to people. Because you get access to people, you get access to things, and you look up things. And I don't look up how to do anything on YouTube that I'm not actually curious about or that I don't think is practical. So, I have a friend who redid his whole bathroom. I have friends who are, work on cars, and it's all through YouTube now. You don't have to buy a big, manual from the auto parts store or anything like that. It's all on there. You have access to this stuff. It's, but it is a double-edged sword. So just to go to the other side of tech and, social media, I use social media for positive things, even though it distracts me from my kids sometimes, but like to connect with people, get people on the podcast, challenge ideas. If I'm like, hey, this is a great policy, someone goes, no, it's not for these reasons. And I go, I guess not. Like you have access, your world grows. And on the other side, there are dangers to that world growing. In things like in social media with echo chambers and the increased tribalism, the divisiveness. It's weird because wasn't Mark Zuckerberg's plan something like to bring the world together? Was Facebook?
Sure. Yeah, that's one of the things he said. Yeah.
Yeah. And instead, it seems like we're, when people say this is the most divided the country's ever been, like, no, we've been in a civil war. It's been divided. It was divided in the late 60s. It was divided, but it feels more divided, I think, than it is because of social media. You go out and you see your neighbors and stuff like that. It's actually not nearly as divided as you think. But because we have these screens in front of us, it looks very divided. So how do you, if we're talking about trying to do something positive with this technology, with social media and with YouTube and Google and everything like that, how do you filter out the bad? The data shows that especially young girls are severely negatively affected by social media and FOMO, as you said, and body image issues and things like that. How do you weed out the crap from the good stuff? Like, that's a really difficult thing. So can you solve that for us real quick?
Oh, God. Difficult and complex, and a lot to say about that. Okay. I'll start. Let me start small in terms of
Please, yeah. I know that's maybe one of the biggest problems we have as a society right now.
Yeah. So in terms of the digital distraction stuff that I'm interested in, the bigger picture things that I worry about are that there's all these anecdotal things and some research studies that are at least indicating that our attention spans getting shorter, our collective attention spans getting shorter. In terms of, there's a fascinating thing that came out earlier this year. Some researchers, I want to say in Ireland, but I'm not positive, but it was basically seeing trends, how long trends in things last. And they're suggesting that people are losing interest in topics quicker. And I was like, ooh, okay. So if we kind of extrapolate on this and think in terms of all right, so because we're used to more information and more content coming quicker and all these things, maybe we're losing the capacity to hold our attention to things. In the short term, fine. What's so harmful about checking your phone every couple minutes? In the long term, I do worry about things like empathy and being able to have the attention span to actually be all right, so maybe I disagree with whoever you think should be president, or your stance on gun control or something like this. And that's fine. That's part of how a democratic society works. And then we can talk through these things and there's consensus in all of this. What I worry about, and I've noticed this in the UK in terms of the Brexit election, and I've noticed this in the US with the most recent presidential election, is that it's become much more polarizing. And for lack of a better way to put it, people have just gotten meaner. Meaner and less patient with each other. And
is that because of the anonymity? Is that because you're not there's a barrier? People will yell when they're in their car surrounded by steel and glass. Is that part of it?
Certainly that plays a part with it, but that can't account for a lot of people who aren't afraid at this point to be assholes to each other with their name and their affiliation for these sort of things. So it's kind of, there's become these euphemisms for I'm just being honest. I'm just telling it how it is. And whenever I hear someone say that, I've kind of braced myself internally. It's okay, here comes the racist or sexist or homophobic or
right.
Something. But it's funny that this has become a thing in the last few years. And I really worry about just there's one thing to be I disagree with what you're thinking. There's another thing that I've noticed, and which really alarms me because I've done civic education and been in this field also, that it's become, I disagree with you and now I hate you. And I was all right, so this whole shutting down of conversation thing becomes so pernicious and so well, if we can't even talk to each other, and we're not talking to each other a lot of times, we're talking across each other and nobody's listening. And I was all right, so when we talk about fractured society and we talk about polarization and all these things, are we losing the capacity to even listen to entertain thoughts we don't necessarily like or agree with?
Right. Yeah, and this is a time when we can talk. That's why I guess what's so strange about this is it's willful ignorance, willful blindness. Because you can, if you really have an issue with, this is how I get people on the podcast who are, Trump supporters or Trump, haters, whatever it is, you can talk to them, and you can talk to them in a genuinely curious way. Why do you think that banning assault rifles is a bad idea? Like, genuinely, bring me into your world a little bit. We have the access to do that, where for a long time, we didn't. It's just like you lived in your town and you had access to the people in your town, but now you have access to everyone. And the fact that we're not using it to get better information is just so curious to me. It's just, I don't understand it. I don't understand why can't everyone be like me? you know, like, I don't know.
I want to say that, like, some of this is probably a human nature thing. And like, I'm still optimistic. I feel like things will get better, and maybe this is kind of like a growing pain stage where,
that makes sense.
When we think about the internet, 10 or 15 years ago, and I was like, all right, well, people were using it for different things than they were now necessarily. Sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second.
That makes sense. That, like, the idea is growing pains.
Yeah, and then this whole echo chamber thing that we talked about a little bit, like, some of that is very much built into the system. The fact that, like, Facebook news feeds can be gamed, and there's pretty strong research at this point that the social media things. All right, so we know for a fact, this is fact, that the things that get the most engagement on social media are the things that make you angry, depressed, or like the negative, the hot emotions are the ones that are the stickiest content. Just think about this for a second. Like, think about your own recent experience on social media. It's the stuff about, like, oh, there's a mass shooting this week. There's a, like, it's the stuff that upsets us that tends to. It's hard to prove these sort of things, but like, these are the things that we're fed to on a regular basis too, based on algorithms, because more than likely we're going to click, and more than likely we are going to be engaged. So like, the tech companies, Facebook, Twitter, and all these things, Instagram, because Instagram is owned by Facebook, and it's like, they don't care how you feel when you're using their platform. All they care about is how often you use their product. And if it takes making you angry or depressed to use it, that's what they're going to do in order to, like, get you to stick on it. They do not have the user's best interests at heart. And keeping that in mind in terms of, like, all right, so maybe I am being manipulated by this thing. Like, I need to think about this more. That is such a crucial thing in terms of, like, why do I feel so angry after being on Facebook for 30 minutes or an hour, or upset? Because it's by design. We have to think about that.
Is that just to, like, and this because you've actually worked at these companies. Is that, I'll just give pushback. Is that true? Do they just not care that are they aware that they are, like, dividing the nation in serious ways and causing all of this strife in people's lives, and families are getting torn apart, and they just go, well, free will, it is what it is. I got to make my money. I mean, do you know what I'm saying? Like, is this?
Yeah. I mean, some of it is, it gets political, it gets economic, but like, the short answer, I think, for some of these tech companies is that it's still, these are, they're private companies. Like, their goal is to make money, and their goal is to do better than their competitors. And there is no regulation on a lot of these things.
There was that Sam Harris podcast. That Sam Harris podcast about like the lack of regulation was really startling to me. Maybe that's part of the growing pains, right? Like, we're figuring this out, and part of that is what regulations and how do we regulate, and should we regulate in what ways, and all that stuff, because it is so new.
Yeah. And because you brought up the point about the negative effects, like, it certainly seems that teenage girls, especially that kind of like 12 to 16, 17, 18 range, female users tend to be hit hardest in terms of depression and more adverse effects. And gosh, I saw an example at a talk, which was like, it almost seemed too gross to be real, but it was, I don't know who made the app exactly, but you can take a picture of yourself, and basically it wants you to hate your body and hate what you look like. So you can Photoshop your face, and all these things. And I saw example after example. They were all young girls, just in this talk that we saw. But it was like, all right, like maybe a little, thinner, lighter skin was a big one, bigger eyes. It just got so extreme. Like, with these apps, there's more than one app like this, but it's basically a Photoshop yourself thing, so that you kind of be like, oh, this is my ideal. If I only look like this, I would be happy. These things are sick. Like, those shouldn't be allowed in terms of, like, what they're doing to, like, body image things. And it got so out of hand towards the end. It's like these people didn't even look human. Like they were like vaguely alien looking in terms of like, it's like, well, these aren't normal proportions, and these aren't like, things that normal human beings can look like. But somehow in their head, it was very telling and very like profoundly troubling in terms of what social media and Instagram photos. I've noticed a thing nowadays with Instagram reality where some fashion people are doing their behind the scenes kind of like, here's what I actually look like, and here's what the post that gets the 10,000 clicks on it looks like. And I was like, well, one of them is fiction, and that really warps our worldview about things. So that is a big one. It's like at some point that has to change, but there's no rules against it right now.
Yeah, and and it also, I mean, if your daughter or son is on social media at 12 or 14 or 15, like you got to stay on it, because I think there are a lot of people who will get that app and be like, oh, this will be fun, I'll just look at it, and it won't affect them in any kind of serious way. But then there's other people that it will. So, like you have to really talk to these kids, and goes out for teachers and parents and everything of like, and I mean, of, giving them self-worth and having the self-worth, aligned with who they are as a person and all that kind of stuff. And it's still no guarantee, because we're all affected by body image issues. I mean, it was like Barbie doll when I was a kid, that Barbie had these proportions that she'd like fall over because her feet were like size 3 and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Now you can do that, for yourself. So so you got to find a way to navigate around that. Part of what I'm doing on social media with like my whatever, like 1,500 followers or something, is trying to be something more positive. But it's frustrating when I'm like, oh, here's a great way to, get what you want, from your parents or whatever it is, or, here's a great way to help your self-esteem or to accomplish a goal. And then, someone just, drives a Ferrari over a bunch of money and that gets 20 million views, or, someone just like, throws a water balloon at some person on the street and it's not a smart bomb, you get everything. And in there you get wet garbage and you get gold. There's a lot of brilliance out there, and I don't know how to weed through it. I mean, is it just a process? Do you find filters maybe? Do you find people that you respect and like, and then you see what they are watching and what influences them? Is that?
I think that's a good way to start in terms of like, look for the people that are like, all right, this is very positive and I feel like I'm getting something out of it. Who is this person following? Or like, who are similar like-minded things, like finding those communities. And when I say communities, I mean that in a broad sense. I don't mean tribes in terms of like, ooh, these are people who just think like me. It's healthy to find things that aren't necessarily what we would do, but taking advantage of the fact that it's like, serendipity can be a wonderful thing on the internet and social media. It's like, oh, we discover things that we wouldn't have discovered before. I think that's great. It's sort of when we kind of like narrow ourselves into these things. I'm guilty of it too, with the Facebook thing. At a certain point, like I did use a browser extension for the presidential election. I was like, all right, you know what? No more Trump. Like no more. And like you can actually filter out keywords for Trump. It was like, I don't want to see it. Like I just don't want to see it.
I feel like there's just nothing came up. You say filter out Trump. Yeah, it's like nothing. It's like puppies.
Yes. So like, in small doses, like, hey, maybe that's what I needed at that time. It was like, it wasn't trying to be a burring in the sand moment, which probably isn't that helpful. Like it's easy to just disengage, but like, what you're doing and like, what others are doing in terms of like trying to like, send out useful things and like, hopeful things is like, at least it's something, at least it's contributing something positive, which is kind of all we can do in the short term. When it comes to parents and teachers and educators and all these things, the same, I think, takeaway message applies in terms of like, you learn by doing. So it's sort of like, if you're concerned about what children or students are doing, like kind of being online yourself, at least enough to like get the basics down is kind of important.
Yeah. And, and I think that we have to, and this is a theme that comes up in this podcast a lot, but taking, a level of discipline. The fact is that you recognized, all right, this is not good for me. This is not helping me. This is not good for my point of view. This is not good for just like my sanity. So I'm going to block it. There is a level here where you go, you know what, this cigarette smells and my fingers smell, my breath smells. You know what, I'm flicking this thing. I'm not going to smoke for a little bit. It's hard. And to say, if anyone says they're not addicted to their phone or they're not addicted to social media, okay, let's stop. I don't want to. That's what heroin addicts say. Like, it is clearly addictive. And if you have addictive tendencies, you have to try, there's a lot of ways, and I've covered my social media, you follow Jocko Willink or someone like that, and these Navy SEALs who talk about discipline. You got to practice discipline because there are a lot of traps there. And if you don't start to have some self-awareness of this is not good for me, I am going to start to change the trajectory of the path I'm on, then you're going to get caught up in it. And we all do. And the difference is some of us, and sometimes I don't, but some of us go, okay, this is not good for me. I'm going to shift it as hard as it is. I'm going to lock my phone away. My family has a little like basket here that my wife and I call the time machine. We put our phones in there. We say we go back to when we first met in 2010, when we weren't on our phones all the time. She's a business owner and working and stuff. And we, you have to like force that process on yourself, that discipline of, I'm going to give this up. This isn't good for me. And it's really hard to do. It's really, really difficult. But I think that everyone listening needs to just start taking inventory on, is this good for me? Am I getting more good than bad from this? And if the answer is no, then all right, well, then I got to just start adjusting. But it's very difficult. I'm not saying this is easy. It's challenging, but perhaps it's a challenge that's worth taking on.
Yeah, and even getting to that reality checkpoint of just sort of like, I don't feel, like I feel terrible after doing these things. Maybe I should change that. That's the hard thing about habits, is that sometimes we're not even able to get to that point and be like, it's so automatic, it's so rote, these sort of things. One book that I read earlier this year, it's called Notes on a Nervous Planet. He's a UK writer and novelist, but he's fun. So he talks a little bit about mental health, his own mental health, and just sort of like the effects that technology and these sort of things. But the idea, the title, Notes on a Nervous Planet, is that everything feels very frenetic and very stressful right now. So he kind of gives some of his own personal anecdotes about how we can kind of like detox, do digital detox and these kind of things, and like getting us to question and just be like, kind of like simple, fun thought problems, just in terms of like, why are we doing that? Why are we so into, this or that? From an outsider perspective, like we would look very weird engaging in some of the behaviors that we do. Yeah. And I was like, all right, so that's good. So like, whether it comes through a book or a podcast or a chat with a friend or a mentor or whatever, like, getting to that reality check point where it's, sort of like, I think I want to rethink some of these things. I'll give you another example, which surprised me, but not really, really surprised me. An anecdote recently from earlier, it was either this year or last year, 90% of UK adults who took a survey said the very first thing they did in the morning, the very first thing for anything else, check the phone, which means that it's by the bedside and all these things. And I was like, think about that for a second. I was like, what are we, a lot of people will say alarm clock is the thing that they use. But, I was like, are you really just using it for an alarm clock? Are you also checking the Facebook for the red notifications, or the Twitter, or the Instagram, and all these things? Well, since I checked that, maybe I should check the news too. Oh, I just got an email, and these sort of things. And, it's very easy to fall into these habits, and it feels like, but I need to check these things first thing in the morning for everything else. Like, do we really need to, or do we just have this very strong want to do these things? So that's a habit. That is an addictive thing, that like these are patterns of behavior that we don't always see.
Yeah. I've been teaching for 13 years, I think, high school. And every year for the past 5 or so, the number of students who say they suffer from anxiety has grown by probably like 20%. I mean, it's startling, and it's sad, and it's for some of them, it's crippling anxiety. And I, for my Instagram, I try to look up like high school advice as like a hashtag and see what kids are asking about. I mean, not even close. I don't even know what the second one was, but the number one was anxiety about college, anxiety about friends, anxiety, just that word anxiety. And then, like you said, when you said like a frenetic pace, like that feels just like that word is just like, it just feels like just anxiety is just all this pent up stuff. And that is compounded clearly by tech. So I think any other thoughts, because I do want to bring you back to get into more of like the kind of biological effects of it, sleeping with it next to your bed and stuff. I've heard you talk about that, which is really interesting. But anything else about tech in education? that you think is important for people listening, just to try and update a school to the 21st century. I'm going to do this series of about 6 podcasts about what would a perfect school look like, or a great school look like in 20 years. And then, so we have a target, we have a bullseye, and we're going to try and aim for that. What would, just as like a kind of closing, I guess, for this particular topic would be, what would that look like? Like, what would you, if you could say, like, this would be an ideal way to use tech, and even if the tech doesn't exist now, but you just think it's something that'd be possible, what would that maybe look like? Just like, if you can just create it, Tal, you're in charge. What would the ideal kind of look like?
I mean, like, for whatever reason, like, even though we're kind of talking about more hardware stuff, like, I was sort of thinking more on the software people side of things, in terms of, like, maybe the solution isn't really a device so much as it is the way in which we go about things. Like, I'm a big fan of not everything has to be a top-down model of just, like, the teacher talks and the student listens. Like, it could, in 10 or 15 years, be a much more collaborative learning environment, which I think would be really cool. I'm starting to see things in terms of open educational resources, the OER movement, in terms of, like, I see things where students are creating learning resources that are then being used alongside other classroom things. Like, wow, that's new, and that's very encouraging in terms of, like, all right, the teacher's role is to give the students the tools, both like the know-how of how to use these apps, these websites, or whatever, and then it's up to the students to then go and create, and then in turn, like, kind of like what you're doing right now, like putting out stuff that other people in other communities are finding useful. To me, that's very exciting in terms of, like, wow, that would really change things, so that instead of just education coming just from purveyors of textbooks and just from, the whatever, like, if things are starting to become more globally community based, and I was like, that excites me. Like, that would be a very cool way of using things, and be like, all right, so we're connected, and we're not just, we can do so much more than just, like, sharing YouTube videos and these sort of things. Like, we can really create something that, I don't know, like, let's take the civics class example for something. It was like, maybe classrooms in different parts of the world or different parts of different countries are collaborating on, like, I have this problem in our local community on this, like, how could, have you done this sort of thing? Oh, here's what we did. And it's like, I've never heard of this. That's so cool. And, et cetera, et cetera. That kind of, like, more knowledge sharing sort of thing is probably what gets me exciting in whatever form that takes. I think, that's something I could really see happening in the next 10, 15, 20 years.
That is awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, those ideas, I just was writing it down, like, oh, how can I try and figure this some way to do that now? Like, creating things that are useful is so important. I mean, this is like the idea of, like, entrepreneurship and stuff like that. And, if you can create something that people hold valuable or see value in, that's it. That's what you got to do. That's how you find success, is you make something that is valuable to people. So it's not some arbitrary, like, follows this rubric, and then because you follow these rules, then you get this grade. Like, rules for what? Like, if you can make something that's appealing to people and people find valuable, that's great. And then also the concept of problem solving and tapping into brains outside of your little classroom. Because if you teach at a private school in LA, and you could tap into, like a charter school, and let's say you're a private school in, like, Santa Monica. Okay, you could go to, like, a charter school or a public school in like Highland Park or something, or, Compton or something like that, and like work together. Because there is something, and I've talked about this before in the podcast too, where the people who need help don't generally interact with the people who are in the capacity to do the helping. There's a lot of, like, I'll help you, I know what you need, and not like, what do you need? What kind of stuff are you struggling with? It's not a zero-sum game. We can make better use of resources now, and we can scale this access to brains and access to ideas. And there's a lot of brilliance in schools and in communities and places around the world even that is just untapped. So if we can tap into that, then we can advance everything. We get a solar battery that we can just charge up a house. We need to get access to these brains to do it, and it's definitely possible. That's I'm just thinking, like, really big, but Why not?
Yeah, cool. That's the hopefully near science fiction answer that I would go with. Is like, all right, the hell with worksheets or these kind of make work, assignment things. Like, teach students to create and share useful stuff, useful ideas, and useful concepts and things. And I was like, that to me would be like a very exciting, world to live in, educational world to live in, hopefully soon.
And kids dig it. The reason why school sucks is because they don't connect that learning this will help me as the 16-year-old, in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. How is learning about the War of 1812 helping me? But if you can create a class that you can connect those things, it's doable. These math problems, whatever, the more practical you make your classroom, the better. And we can do that with technology.
And it will make them feel more empowered too. The reason why school sucks for a lot of students is that they don't feel like they have any choice or anything. It's like, all right, I got to sit here and listen to this boring teacher who, whether I like it or not. But if they actually feel like they have a sense of agency and they have a chance to contribute something worthwhile and create something that they really care about. And I was like, gosh, isn't that the ideal?
Yeah. Like they do with everything else in their life, with like what to watch on TV and where to get clothes. You don't just go to the local store anymore. You can buy clothes from anywhere. You can get music from anywhere. Like, they don't have to just go to the record store, whatever the record store has. You can get music from anywhere, SoundCloud. So why not make education like that? But you still need, I'm not trying to put myself out of a job. You still need a teacher there to guide you into, well, here's why this is not good. Like, if they say, hey, I want to get this outfit, no, this outfit will not work because you're in Minnesota and it's February and it's shorts. Like, you do need someone there to guide this idea, but you can guide it along what they want. Why do you want shorts? Well, because I want to do this. Okay, well, you can do it this way and it's warmer and you still get what your desired, part of getting shorts. Okay. That's a weird metaphor, but you kind of see where I'm going, right?
Yeah. I think teachers are okay. We won't have robot teachers anytime soon. So I think we're safe.
No, but the teachers who memorize the presidents in order, you guys are endangered, and because, I say before, to my students, the day I can be replaced by Google is the day I should. So I gotta make my job something that Google can't do or can't do easily.
That's a good standard to hold to, I think, yourself too.
Yeah. Okay, cool, Tyler. Well, I hope to bring you back and do this again, because you're my tech guy.
Let's do it again.
Where can people find you, see your stuff, hear what you're up to, all that kind of stuff?
I do have a website. My website is just my full name, tylershores.com. And Twitter is probably where I'm most active.
Okay. And is that your name too?
Yeah, it is just twitter.com/Tyler Shores. Yeah. So those are probably the most active ways. And I think you and I should write a blog post on some of these things. So we'll find a home for talking about some of these things for people who are listening, or if people have questions, any of your audience or listeners over there have things that they want to ask us, maybe we could address that in a blog post too. It could be kind of fun. Let's do some cross-channel stuff here.
Awesome. Let's use this technology across the pond. Yes. All right. Gets very meta. All right, cool, Tyler. Thank you for doing this, man. I'll talk to you soon.
Sure. Yes. All right. Good luck with everything.
This has been Cylinder Radio. The success of this podcast and the educational revolution that I hope you will be a part of is dependent on those who find value in it. Please take a few moments to review us on iTunes so the show is more easily found. If there was a perspective on today's topic that was not highlighted in this episode, or you have an idea for an episode topic that you want to understand more deeply, please email us at cylinderradio@gmail.com. Follow me on Instagram @WillRusch, WILLREUSCH. Thank you for your support, and I look forward to the next one.